To date in this class, we've only worked with small amounts of text in labels and text boxes. Sometimes, though, we want to have much larger amounts of text. In this example, I've created a text box that's pretty large, and it has a scroll bar to allow us to show more text than what might be able to display within the bounds of that text box. So here's the example. We have buttons for Neil Armstrong, John Kennedy, and Richard Nixon. Now the John Kennedy one you can see is a longer amount of text, and that one I do need to scroll. Now of course I could set the text smaller and maybe avoid the scroll bar, or maybe for the Richard Nixon I want to set all these a little bit larger, and that might then require some scrolling. However, the coding of this for a large amount of text can be a little unwieldy. Now this isn't a huge amount of text, but let's say we wanted to display the text of the Declaration of Independence. That is much longer than this excerpt of John Kennedy's speech at Rice University in September 1962. But let's take a look at the code as we now have it, and I'll show you a better way to code this using string resources. For the interface, I have a picture box named pick image, and I imported the images of Neil Armstrong, John Kennedy, and Richard Nixon. And I'm going to set my default to Armstrong. Then I have a text box named txt speech, and I set the text to the content that I wanted for Neil Armstrong, so this will be the default. But I also set up scroll bars for the text box to be vertical. And you can see the size of it here. It's a pretty large text box, takes up most of the right-hand side. 3 buttons, BTN Armstrong, BTN Kennedy, BTN Nixon. Let's take a look at their code. For each of the 3 buttons, I am setting the pick image to one of the resource images, and I've hard-coded the text for each person. Now for Armstrong, I did it so we can read it all here, but for Kennedy and Nixon, you can see it runs way off the screen. In fact, it goes pretty far off the screen. That makes this a little harder to read. Now I could go through and divide those up like I did for Armstrong, and that takes some work. Adding in the carriage return line feeds and the ampersands, split this across several lines of code. But it works. However, there is a better way to do this, and that's using string resources. We've seen resources with images, but we can set up a resource file for strings as well. In the Solution Explorer, I'm going to right-click on my solution, choose Add, Component. I'm going to click on General, and here you'll see there's a Resources file. I'm going to click that, and let's just name this Moon. So it's got an extension of .resx, so that's a resource file. I'm going to click Add, and we'll see the Moon resource file added into my project, and I get in the editor here a table where I can enter a name and a value, and if I wanted I could add comments. I'm going to enter a name here of Armstrong _ speech. And the reason I do the underscore speech is my images that I added in were named Armstrong, Kennedy, and Nixon. I want a slightly different name on the string resources here. And then for the value, in a Word document, I have the text that I want to use. I'm going to copy that and just come back to value and paste. And we can see the text there. I'm going to add another one. This one will be Kennedy _ speech. And so I'm consistent, I'm going to give it a lowercase k. Same thing. I'm going to copy the text that I want. And paste. And maybe I want a space between the paragraphs. And I can do a Shift-Enter to add those spaces in between the paragraphs. Last one here is going to be our Nixon speech. Now, one other thing I want to point out here is I can have other types of resources in this resx file. In fact, up here we'll see we're working with strings, and I can add a resource or remove a resource here, but notice with the string there is a drop down, and I can go to images. And I can import my images here as well as I did with directly from the pick image. I can click the drop down for add resources and choose add existing files, locate my images, and select those and say open. I'm going to choose replace it since it already is in my file, each one of these. And there then are my 3 images that are part of this resource file. And I do that because I want to show you how you can use the resources in the image file, and that you can have multiple types of resources within this resource file. Not only do I have strings and images, but I can also do icons, audio, and files. Let's go back to our code. So now for the code, I'm going to change the Armstrong one, pick image.image is my resources dot, and I'm going to choose moon dot, and here I have access to the resources. Now, so there's an Armstrong and there's an Armstrong speech. I'll do Armstrong. And then for txt speech.text, I'm basically going to do the same thing. I'm going to copy and paste, but here after moon, I want the Armstrong speech. Okay, I'm just going to copy all that. And then all I need to do is change these from Armstrong to Kennedy, Armstrong speech to Kennedy speech, and then change the last one to Nixon and Nixon speech. Let's run this. Here's my application running. Neil Armstrong, John F. Kennedy, Richard Nixon. Now on the Armstrong and Nixon ones, I failed to add in a blank line between my paragraphs. I can always go back to the moon resource, go to strings, and if I do a shift enter, that'll add a carriage return line feed in between the different paragraphs. Neil Armstrong, John Kennedy, and Richard Nixon. If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the Programming Practicum playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos I create, you can click my picture in the top right to subscribe to the channel.